Listen to me very carefully, before the noise of this busy world drowns out my voice. Before you continue chasing your goals, I need you to hear something truly important. What I am about to share with you is not a dry lecture or a sermon. It is a truth that I have only been able to see clearly after 75 years of wandering this earth. And I promise you, it doesn't matter whether you kneel 5 times a day on a rug, light candles on Sundays under the high arches of a cathedral, or have never set foot in a church in your life. This conversation is important for every living heart. So please stay with me for a few minutes. Don't fast forward this moment. It may become the very mirror in which you see yourself. My name is Teresa. I am 75 years old, and for my entire conscious life, I have struggled with one single question that I am sure every person asks themselves in those moments when the lights go out and only silence remains. What do I really believe in? You see, I grew up in the old French Quarter of Montreal, where Sunday morning was not just a tradition, it was an immutable law of the universe. My younger sister, Annette, and I, still little girls in stiff, starched dresses that pricked our skin, went to St. Joseph's Cathedral every week. My father was a deacon, a symbol of unwavering righteousness. My mother taught Sunday school, her voice always gentle, her answers always ready. I memorized poems and psalms before I could tie my own shoelaces. At that time, everything seemed so clear, so monolithic. The world was like an old map, where all the routes were written in black and white, where sin was, where virtue was, and where salvation was. And if you suddenly had doubts, you just hid them deeper, because in our house they were not spoken aloud. Doubt was considered a weakness, a crack in the foundation. But here's what no one will ever tell you in fancy Sunday school: life doesn't give a damn about your confidence. It doesn't read your prayer books. It presents you with events that in an instant turn all your memorized answers into useless dust. The first time my carefully constructed world collapsed was when I was 23. It happened on that gray, bitterly cold day when we buried Claire, my closest friend, who was closer to me than my own family. She died instantly on an icy highway near Quebec. Claire was the kind of person people refer to as a ray of light. She was infinitely kinder than I am. She helped the homeless, cared for abandoned animals, and radiated such warmth that everyone around her felt important. And then, in an instant, her light went out. I still remember that day at the Notre Dame de Neige cemetery. The wind chilled me to the bone as I stood looking at her coffin and listened to our pastor's familiar, sterile words about God's great plan and a better world, where Claire was now supposedly happier than she had been with us. And for the first time in my life, I felt neither humility, nor sadness, nor even despair. I felt anger. It was a burning, primal anger, because all those pious phrases ceased to have any meaning at that moment. If the better world required the death of people like Claire, then I wanted nothing to do with that world. That anger became the spark that ignited a fire in me that I could no longer wanted to extinguish. I began to ask questions. Real questions. Not the polite questions from Sunday school, where you already know the right answer. I began to read everything I could get my hands on, eagerly searching for the truth elsewhere. I reread the Bible with new eyes, but next to it on my desk lay the Quran, the Tibetan books of the dead, Hindu treatises, and the works of atheist philosophers who claimed that there was nothing above us but the starry sky. My sister Annette looked at me with horror, fearing for my soul, and my parents prayed for my return. But I could no longer go back. Do you know what I discovered in this chaotic search? In each of these traditions, in every human aspiration toward the heavens, there was something deeply true. Each was just another language in which people tried to describe this same inexpressible mystery. I realized that truth is not a closed room to which only we have the key. It is a boundless ocean, and every shore that people land on has a right to exist. Here are the expanded chapters 3 and 4. We delve deeper into the atmosphere of Montreal at night and the details of that inner turning point when the foreign ceases to be frightening and becomes infinitely close. It took about 30 years after that day in the cemetery before life taught me a lesson that finally erased the boundaries in my heart. At the time, I was working in the old library at McGill University. It was a majestic building, smelling of centuries of dust, old wood, and leather bindings. My partner was a woman named Sarah. She was a devout follower of Judaism, always dressed modestly and quietly reading Psalms in Hebrew during her breaks. I confess to you honestly, and may I be ashamed for it, at first, I kept my distance from her. Despite all my reading, I still harbored old weeds of prejudice sown in my childhood. My inner voice, raised in strict Catholicism, whispered to me about the lost, about the other covenant, about the invisible wall that supposedly stands between us. But one day in November, an ice storm hit Montreal. The whole city froze, transportation came to a standstill, and Sarah and I found ourselves stuck in the archives, finishing an urgent inventory of a collection of rare manuscripts. It was around 11 o'clock at night. The huge library building was plunged into a hollow silence, interrupted only by the howling wind outside the windows. In the dim yellow light of the table lamp, Sarah began to talk. She spoke of Shabbat not as a set of prohibitions, but as a sacred island of time where man ceases to be a creator and becomes simply a witness to the miracle of life. She spoke of Tikkun Olam, the belief that the world was broken into pieces at creation, and that it is the task of each of us, regardless of the name of our God, to find these sparks of light and bring them together through good deeds. Listening to her quiet, melodious voice in that empty office, I suddenly felt a chill run down my spine. I realized that she was describing the same thirst, the same unbearable need for connection to something greater that I had felt as I knelt before the altar at St. Joseph's Cathedral. Her rituals were different. Her Sabbath was Saturday instead of Sunday, but the flame inside her was the same color as mine. We were two women trapped in a snowstorm, and in the face of eternity, our differences weighed no more than the snowflakes outside the window. I realized that religion is just a language, but love is the meaning of the message. In 75 years, I have seen enough to understand that faith can be both a healing balm and a deadly poison. I have seen people use religion as a shield to protect themselves from pain, and how they turn it into a sword to punish those who are different from them. My heart still aches when I remember my younger sister, Annette. She was the most honest of us all. When she began asking priests uncomfortable questions about the role of women in the church, about justice, and about why our love is so often restricted by rules, she was simply shown the door. She was declared a rebellious soul. I saw her faith, once bright and alive, begin to fade under the weight of condemnation from those who called themselves her brothers. I saw families in Montreal who hadn't spoken to each other for decades simply because their child had chosen a spouse from another parish or another faith. I saw acts of incredible cruelty justified by quotations from sacred texts. And every time this happened, I wanted to scream. Because none of this is about him. It's all about our little human ego trying to privatize God, lock him in a chest and say, "He belongs only to us and you are strangers." I visited Jewish synagogues where I felt the incredible weight and dignity of 1,000 years of history of survival. I sat in silence with Buddhists, learning that peace is not found in a temple, but in the mind. I prayed in the boisterous, joyful communities of Pentecostals whose energy would have shocked my old, staid pastor. And in each of these places, I found something authentic. Something that pointed to the same truth we so often lose behind rituals. Don't be cruel. Be humble. Recognize that you are only a tiny part of a great mystery that cannot be fully contained in any book or building. Faith is not walls, it is windows. And if your window is painted over with hatred, you will never see the light. You know, when I turned 50, Life decided to test the strength of all those philosophical conclusions I had been working toward for so long. It was my personal year of ashes. My husband's and my small business collapsed overnight due to a series of absurd market crashes and betrayal by partners. We found ourselves in a financial abyss that we had only read about in the newspapers before. Added to this was the emptiness in the house Annette had left. The relationship with my parents was strained, and I began to seek salvation at the bottom of a bottle. One glass of wine in the evening turned into two, then a bottle. I tried to drown out the unbearable ringing in my ears, the fear of the future that paralyzed me. One night, around 2 o'clock, I found myself in our old garage. Around me were boxes of unsold merchandise, monuments to my failure. That night, I did something I hadn't really done in years. I began to pray, but it wasn't the prayer my mother taught me as a child. I didn't fold my hands piously, I didn't use flowery Latin phrases, and I didn't quote psalms. I sat on the dusty floor, leaning my back against the cold metal of the shelving, and just screamed into the void. I said, I don't know if anyone can hear me. I'm not even sure you exist beyond my imagination. I don't know what the right prayer is or which temple I should run to. But if there is even a drop of life force in the universe, if something really exists beyond this darkness, I need help. I'm drowning. I can't handle this alone anymore. It was the most honest and wrong prayer of my life. There was no humility in it, just raw, bleeding need. And you know what happened in that moment? Nothing. No light from heaven, no angelic singing, no burning bush among the old tires. Just the smell of dampness and the silence of Montreal at night. But the next morning, as the gray light barely broke through the fog, there was a knock at my door. There stood my neighbor Mark, a man I barely knew from brief nods at the mailboxes. He was a regular mechanic, always covered in oil, and I had never seen him at our church. Mark shifted awkwardly from foot to foot and asked if I wanted to have coffee with him at a small diner on the corner. We ended up sitting there for 3 hours. Mark didn't quote scripture to me or promise that everything will work out according to God's will. Instead, he told me his story, how he lost everything to alcohol 5 years ago, how he stood on the edge of a bridge, and how he found the strength to come back. He shared the contact information of people who could help with debts and told me about a support group in our community, the existence of which I, with my arrogance as an educated parishioner, had no idea about. Was it God who heard my cry in the garage? Or was it pure coincidence? Or maybe it was just a manifestation of human kindness that lives in us regardless of dogma. Honestly, now at 75, I'll tell you, I don't know. And more importantly, I'm no longer trying to figure it out. Because that day, I realized something more significant. Help came not in the form of a miracle, but in the form of a person I had previously considered outside our circle. The older I get, the less confidence I have in the details of theology. I don't know if there is a heaven with golden gates or a hell with cauldrons. I don't know if we are reborn as birds or if this is all we have. And you know what? I'm fine with that now. Because I know for sure that the mystery of life is much greater than any book, any building, or any tradition. And the appropriate response to this mystery is not fanatical certainty that we are right, but quiet reverence for how strangely and beautifully our destinies are intertwined. I watch the young people of today in Montreal, these kids with tattoos and their phones glued to their hands, and I see them leaving traditional religion en masse in waves. I see the empty pews in our cathedral and the silence where children's voices once rang out. Many of my peers grumble at them, accusing them of spiritual emptiness and pride. But I look at them and feel only deep understanding. I understand why they are leaving. They have seen too much hypocrisy behind the gilded altars. They have seen condemnation where there should have been support. They have been hurt by people who claimed to speak for God, but whose hearts were full of ice and arrogance. I want to say to each of them, I understand your pain. I really do. But I also want to whisper something else to them. Don't give up on your search for meaning just because some people have poisoned your well. Don't discard the great, eternal questions just because someone gave you bad, empty, or cruel answers. You don't have to accept everything you were taught as a child as unshakable truth. You don't have to stay in a tradition that doesn't nourish your soul, but only squeezes it in the vice of fear. But don't stop searching. Don't stop searching for that very connection, that purpose, that something that makes you feel part of a vast, majestic plan that is greater than your own self. Because this quest is not the result of religious programming. It is the very essence of human existence. It is as real as breathing. After 75 years, I know for sure, the mystery of life does not tolerate arrogant certainty. The only worthy response to it is humility, wonder, and pure, childlike awe at the fact that we exist at all. You know, I still go to my old church almost every Sunday. I still sit on the same wooden benches where I once sat with little Annette. But now I do it for completely different reasons. Not because I consider our faith to be better or more correct than those who do not walk under these arches. Not because I fear divine wrath or believe that I must perform rituals to save my soul. No, I go there because there is something deeply human and healing in singing psalms together, in that special silence when hundreds of people simultaneously try to find the meaning of their existence. It is my native language, and it is easier for me to whisper my thank you in it. But now my boundaries are blurred forever. Every Wednesday, I meet for a cup of tea with Sarah, the woman from the library, and we spend hours discussing the wisdom of the ancient prophets and the modern pains of our city. I read Buddhist sutras before bed because they taught me a piece I couldn't find in the catechism. I learned from atheist friends who reflect on ethics, compassion, and honesty much more deeply than many of the righteous people I knew. All of this has taught me an important lesson. The point is not to have the right set of answers. The point is to remain curious and endlessly kind. Understand that every person you meet on your path, whether Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, or agnostic, carries within them a unique, priceless fragment of truth. And that fragment is especially important to you when it is completely different from your own. My faith is no longer a fortress with locked gates. It is a large, open table in the garden where there is room for everyone who comes in peace. If your faith makes you more loving, more compassionate, and more willing to serve others, then it is fulfilling its purpose. But if it makes you a judge, if it sows fear or arrogance, then you are lost, even if you stand in the very center of the temple. My younger sister Annette passed away 3 years ago. We lived side by side for 70 years, sharing everything: starched dresses in childhood, the bitterness of first disappointments, and the long search for meaning. In those last weeks, when she was lying in the hospice, looking out the window at the gray roofs of Montreal, she asked me in a quiet, almost transparent voice, "Teresa, do you think I'll really see you all again? Mom, Dad, Claire? Or is there just silence?" I looked at her, this woman I loved more than life itself, whose honest questions had once so frightened our congregation. And I, with all the wisdom I had accumulated over 75 years, did not quote dogma to her. I just took her hand, felt the warmth of her weakening fingers, and said, "I don't know for sure, dear, but I hope so. And if there is even a drop of the love we feel for each other now in the universe, then the answer is yes. We can't just disappear into nothingness." Was it faith? Was it hope? Or just a desperate attempt to comfort her? Now I understand. These differences are not as important as we think they are in our youth. The most important thing is not what you believe with your mind, but how your beliefs make you treat living people. If your faith makes you more tender, more tolerant of others' mistakes, more willing to listen and help, then it is real. If it turns you into a cold judge, if it makes you close the door on others, then you have lost your way, no matter what sacred text you look to. God is not an examiner testing our knowledge of paragraphs. God is the force that makes us hold each other's hands in the dark. I am 75 years old. My path ahead is much shorter than the one behind me. I have, if I'm lucky, another 10 years ahead of me, and I'm still searching. I still wake up in the morning and ask the same questions I asked when I was 20. I am still surprised by where I find beauty and meaning, in an old prayer, in a conversation with Sarah, in the silence of falling snow, or in the eyes of an atheist who risks himself for the sake of justice. And I wouldn't want my life to be any different. I don't want definitive answers because they kill the living search. Listen to my final piece of advice. Whether you consider yourself a deeply religious person or think that all of this is just comforting fairy tales for adults, whether you are at the center of a community or stand completely alone, your questions are valid. Your doubts are not a sin or a sign of weakness. They're a sign of a living, searching soul. Your search for meaning is one of the most beautiful human traits. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Don't let anyone tell you that they have a monopoly on the truth, when the mystery of existence is infinitely greater than any human mind can comprehend. Stay curious. Stay humble. Love people, help people, be insanely kind, and never stop asking your big questions. They are what make us truly human. Thank you for walking this path with me through the streets of Montreal and the corners of my soul. If Teresa's story touched your heart or helped you feel a little less afraid of your own doubts, please subscribe to our channel. Here we collect the voices of those who have lived long lives and are ready to share their true, unvarnished stories. Like this video so that it will be recommended to someone who is currently feeling alone in their search or suffering from the judgment of those around them. Your support helps this community of wisdom grow and warm others. And be sure to write in the comments, has there been a moment in your life when help or truth came to you from a completely unexpected source? What is more important to you today, confidence in your answers or the courage to ask questions? I read every word you write, and your stories make this world a little less lonely for me. Share this video with someone who is struggling right now. Sometimes a simple reminder that it's okay to have doubts can be the best gift for the soul.